Welcome back to Occult Archives, everybody. You know, the place where we unlock those mysteries, the myths, the legends, the ones that surround history's most, well, feared books, I guess you could say. We're not talking dry history here. We like to jump right into these potent, sometimes controversial, always fascinating ideas that, well, frankly, they've kind of sparked fascination and fear and pretty much everything in between.
That's right. And from those grimoires, the ones that promise unimaginable power,
Hmm.
to those ancient manuscripts with secrets that are, well, maybe just too profound, too perilous, too much for most people. We're digging into the stories behind the stories.
Yeah, and today we're going deep. We're doing episode 246, The Forbidden Prophecies of Nostradamus, Hidden Visions, Apocalyptic Conspiracies, and the Occult Science of Time.
Wow, just the title alone. I mean, you can already tell this is going to be a wild ride.
It really is. And for our listeners out there, we know you're here, you want the knowledge, and you want it quickly, and you want it effectively, right? And we totally get it. We don't like wasting time either, so we're going to navigate this whole Nostradamus thing, extract what's important, and hopefully you'll walk away with some of those, those aha
Yeah,
moments.
exactly. Those light bulb moments, right?
Exactly. Now, to add a really interesting twist to this whole Nostradamus deep dive, we're bringing in an interesting source, Annie Besant's In the Outer Court. Now, at first, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Nostradamus and spiritual self-mastery, what's the connection? But Besant's book, it's all about this journey of spiritual growth and like inner discipline.
Yeah.
It's about the soul's path, toward understanding.
Right. And at the core, it's really about focus, the kind of unwavering dedication that you need, no matter what you're doing, really, but especially if you're dealing with something as, well, as intense as prophecy.
So let me get this straight. We've got Nostradamus, famous for his, cryptic predictions, often about the apocalypse and whatnot. And then we've got a book about like spiritual development. How do these two worlds even come together?
Well, think of it this way. Besant's in the outer court, it's like a blueprint almost. It outlines steps. Steps for self-purification, for mastering your thoughts, and for building your character. This is the groundwork, the inner training that you need to even begin to approach, well, deeper knowledge.
So you're saying that the kind of deep study that we see with someone like Nostradamus, and especially when we're talking about the occult science of time, that wouldn't just happen automatically, that it would require this like a specific kind of mindset, a purified intention, like what Besant describes in her book.
Exactly. Now, Besant doesn't actually talk about Nostradamus directly. She doesn't analyze prophecy specifically. But her insights, they offer this really interesting lens for us. They make us think about the discipline, the commitment, the ability to cut out distractions that someone like Nostradamus would have needed. She talks about these individuals who catch she calls it a gleam of this possible ending. It's like a glimpse of a higher purpose. And their diligence, their attentiveness, it becomes who they are.
So it's like they're on this challenging climb, the spiritual ascent. They're moving with this clear direction, even if they can't totally see the peak. And they're training, right? They're purifying what Besant calls this lower nature. That's the everyday you and me with all our desires and fleeting thoughts. And the goal is to reach this higher self, this wiser, more evolved potential.
And what's key here is what Besant calls allegiance to the higher self. It's a conscious choice to set aside all that temporary stuff and dedicate yourself to one purpose. And that purpose is to gather experiences, insights, knowledge, material that helps the true self grow.
So it's not just about being curious, it's about realigning your entire being, right? Like a complete shift in perspective.
Exactly. Besant talks about those who enter this outer court, this initial stage of spiritual striving. They've already turned away from negativity. They're driven by these high ideals. But then she says they face these subtler challenges. Things like intellectual pride, the allure of knowledge just for the sake of it, or the desire for recognition.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And that kind of fits with the whole image of Nostradamus, right? Someone wrestling with this profound, potentially transformative, maybe even dangerous knowledge.
Right. And Besant, she really emphasizes this temptation, this desire to use knowledge for personal gain, to feel special, to have something others don't. She argues that real progress, it needs purification. You have to examine your motives, really see them clearly in the light of a greater truth.
She talks about this desire nature that needs to be purified, the need to get rid of anything that feeds the ego, anything that creates separation. And it's about dismantling those barriers between yourself and others, about being willing to share what you learn. Which brings us back to selfless service, right?
Absolutely. Besant's clear on this. The path to deep understanding, It only opens up when you break down those walls. She uses this powerful analogy, refining gold. You keep the essential qualities, the valuable experiences, but you get rid of the impurities.
So it's not easy, this purification process. Besant talks about tests, these moments where you have to really be honest with yourself about your motivations. Like if you get disappointed because you're not getting recognition, or if you get depressed when things go wrong, it means the ego, that personality, it's still clinging on too tightly.
Yeah, and the key is to cultivate this outward flowing love, this love without any expectation of something in return. You find joy in the act of giving itself.
And she says people in this outer court, they're constantly comparing themselves, not to those they see as below them, but to those who are more spiritually advanced. They're striving for more translucence, which means letting the light of higher truth shine through them.
Exactly. And it's this constant cycle of self-assessment and refinement. And Besant says that in this outer court, temptations, they can disguise themselves as virtues, which
Whoa.
makes them even trickier.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's pretty sneaky. So the only real protection is to stay aligned with the higher self, with those principles.
Right. And that brings us to this really crucial concept of thought control. This is the second key area that Besant lays out in the outer court. She compares the mind to this wild horse that needs to be trained.
Okay, I can see that. Our minds, they do tend to wander off in all sorts of directions, don't they?
They really do. And the aspirant, the seeker, learns to think in a very disciplined way, choosing what to focus on, resisting those unwanted or unhelpful thoughts.
So it's about becoming the master of your own mental space. Like even everyday challenges become opportunities to practice this discipline, learning to not let anxieties about the future or regrets about the past take over.
Exactly. And it requires this constant vigilance, this deliberate turning away from those intrusive thoughts, and maybe even consciously replacing them with something more positive, more enduring.
And eventually the aim is to move away from the activity of that lower mind, right? Not into unconsciousness, but into this deeper consciousness of the soul.
Yeah, it's about accessing that deeper awareness. And Besant acknowledges that there's this challenging stage in between, this feeling of emptiness like a void. But that's just a stage. It's necessary to reach that deeper awareness.
Okay, so this mental strength that you're talking about, this mastery, it becomes even more important when we're talking about those really subtle temptations, right? The ones that target our higher aspirations and try to twist the power of our minds for bad purposes.
Precisely. Besant talks about these hosts of hurrying thoughts, often fueled by negative spiritual influences. If you haven't developed that mental discipline against everyday distractions, how can you possibly withstand that kind of onslaught?
Good point. And this brings us to the building of character, right? Which Besant identifies as the third crucial element.
Right, and she's clear that this isn't about suddenly having all these perfect virtues. It's about this consistent self-training towards a very specific ideal. It's like laying the foundation, sketching the outline, and knowing that the finer details will come later within what she calls the temple itself.
She uses examples like the 16th discourse of the Bhagavad Gita, where Sri Krishna describes the qualities of a divine character. Things like fearlessness, purity of heart, steadfastness, self-restraint, harmlessness in thought and action, truthfulness, the absence of anger, compassion for all beings, and so on.
Right, and these become the aspirational qualities. You cultivate them first through contemplation, and then you actually try to live them out in your daily life, in your words, and your actions.
So there's a strong emphasis on unselfishness, genuine love, and this commitment to harmlessness, right? Along with those really important qualities like courage, inner strength, and resilience. All of that coming together to create this balanced and integrated character.
But she also talks about indifference, and it's important to be clear here. She doesn't mean apathy or not caring. It's more about a sense of proportion that comes from recognizing how temporary earthly things are compared to the vastness of the spiritual journey.
Right, so it's about keeping your cool even when things are chaotic, maintaining that inner balance even when you're facing pleasure or pain, praise or criticism.
Exactly. And as you build this strong character, the fear starts to fade. It's gradually replaced by love and true knowledge.
And she suggests that harm from the outside world, it often gets in through our own internal aggression or unresolved issues. So a heart filled with love, she says, has nothing to fear. And this inner transformation, it leads to a strong, unshakable will, a will that's rooted in understanding and strengthened by compassion.
And this diminishing of personal desire, the letting go of attachments to material things, that's another crucial part of this development. You start to transcend this cycle of rebirth that's driven by earthly desires. The main connection that remains is this deep love for others and this desire for selfless service.
Besson also mentions this challenging experience that people can encounter in the outer court. It's this feeling of emptiness, of being abandoned almost. Like the appeal of earthly satisfactions fades, but the connection to higher guidance isn't quite there yet.
Yeah, that can be a tough spot. But she reassures us that this feeling of emptiness, it's an illusion. It's a necessary stage you have to pass through to access that deeper, more solid support and a more profound connection.
And this brings us to spiritual alchemy, right? This conscious transformation of fundamental forces.
Exactly. It's about taking your raw energies, your life force, your will, your vitality, and refining them. You consciously direct them away from those self-centered aims and towards those higher, more spiritual expressions. It's not just about changing what your energy is directed at, but about purifying the very nature of the energy itself.
And this alchemy, it's linked to the law of sacrifice, right? This principle of giving and receiving, of balance, that's at play throughout the universe.
Exactly. Beland explains that even actions we might see as negative, they create these binding energies that are rooted in desire. True freedom comes from actions that are done without attachment, purely motivated by selfless service.
So what we might see as a sacrifice from our limited perspective is actually an act of joy from a higher perspective.
Right. She uses the example of pleasure seeking. It often leads to suffering because it's so focused on separation. But in spiritual alchemy, you transform that into a way of spreading joy, where you naturally share your positive experiences with everyone. And selfish love, the kind that clings and demands, it's transformed into selfless love, the kind that puts giving and well-being above personal gratification.
And she takes it even further, saying that in this process, you might even be willing to give up significant spiritual achievements if they can't be shared for the greater good.
Exactly. She gives examples of advanced disciples who willingly forego blissful states, even adepts who give up nirvana because they're driven by this desire to serve and help others. And she talks about the possibility of offering strength and understanding to those who are suffering, not to take away their karmic consequences, but to help them endure their experiences with more resilience and courage.
Wow, that's powerful. So this brings us to the point of entry into the temple of higher wisdom.
Right. And Besant emphasizes this quality of earnestness in those who reach this stage. They have a clear purpose, they live their lives with purification, they've mastered their passions, and they have this deep desire for selfless service, even though they still have some imperfections to overcome. And they're ready to embark on these four distinct paths within the temple, each marked by an initiation. And these initiations, they help them shed their remaining weaknesses and move toward liberation.
And Besant describes the conditions inside this temple as being completely different. There's a deeper understanding of reality, a realization that suffering comes from ignorance and that true freedom is possible.
Yes, and consciousness is unbroken. It transcends the limits of birth and death as we understand them, and these advanced beings are there to offer constant support and guidance.
It sounds like a completely different experience. So even though the journey ahead is still significant, these changed conditions, they make it less daunting.
Yeah, it gives us a glimpse into how this kind of deep spiritual transformation can actually happen.
So today, we've been looking at Nostradamus and Annie Besant. And while their paths might seem different, there's this key similarity: the need for dedication and inner work to achieve anything truly significant.
Exactly. And while Besant doesn't specifically tie her ideas to Nostradamus, she really encourages us to think about the discipline and focus that someone like him would have needed. This dedication to purification, thought control, and character building, it might very well have fueled his work.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with the question. Think about these principles of self-mastery and the pursuit of higher understanding. How do they resonate with your own journey, your own quest for knowledge in any area of your life?
Are there outer courts that we all navigate in our own ways, requiring us to dedicate ourselves, to purify our intentions, and to strive for something greater?
It's a thought-provoking question, right? And if you're intrigued and want to explore these ideas further, we highly recommend checking out Annie Besant's In the Outer Court, or diving deeper into the history and mystery surrounding Nostradamus. Who knows what other aha moments are waiting to be discovered?